And this idea of the folly in modern architecture, in our times, very interesting reference in the work of Aldo Rossi in the 1970s in Venice. Aldo Rossi, the architect, Aldo Rossi, has a relationship with us here in Miami. He designed, for instance, the School of Architecture of the city of Miami, which was never he was commissioned to do portions of it fully, actually, but it was never built. But he was a very important figure, academically speaking, pedagogically speaking, and as an influential architect rather, in the building of the city. And I think it's 1979. He builds this for the Venice Biennale. He builds this Teatro del Mondo, a very small theater that was in fact placed on a barge, and it would travel throughout Venice. It's moored here in the customs house. For those of you who have been to Venice, you might remember that this is the very center of town. The bacino is this central, like with Biscayne Bay, is the central body of water around which the city is evolved, the city is founded, the city is constructed. And the theater was a experimental theater, would function as such for a time in during the Venice Biennale, of course, in different parts of the city. And a model is built, of course, and very beautiful drawings are produced for the building. This is not a folly, quite. It's maybe a pseudo-folly or a proto-folly or a neo-folly. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it does have it has certain qualities with the folly, that it's exotic, it's eccentric as well. It's beyond the real, somewhere in the realm of imagination or fantasy, and it is in a great garden, which is the garden of the Venice Lagoon. And so it stems from that. Now, it should also be mentioned, we would like to also discuss, because this is what the project is also an urbanistic project. It has an urban dimension to it, this idea of the barge, of the folly in the barge, in the bay of Miami, reading in foreground against the backdrop of the city in its many manifestations, the wilderness, the forest, the skyscrapers, the houses, and so on, because they're different parts of the bay, correct? We thought we would discuss this project in history that would have an influence, by the way, in Aldo Rossi's conception of the Teatro del Mondo. And it is this Capriccio by Antonio di Canaletto from the 1700s. And the first on cities or urbanism, generally speaking, from an architectural point of view, that is certainly, is that cities have these two fundamental realms. One of them is the private realm, your and my private world, our personal world, the world of the domestic program, the world of our personal needs, and a collective world, a public realm, where we function as a society, where we relate to each other publicly, which implies a different set of considerations, correct? Even different behavior. Canaletto will pursue a research project on this issue of the private realm in its distance from the private realm, or the two, and how the two relate in our minds and in the reality of the city, with a very curious project, a capriccio, he would call them, which is somewhat related to the folly, by the way, in the very meaning of the term, of the Rialto. The Rialto is it's a point in the Grand Canal in Venice where a crossing would be possible, in the city, somewhere in the 8th century, and where in fact between the two islands of the two main islands of the city is actually built. Rialto is in Venice, in Venetian dialect, means Rio Alto, the high river point. And Canaletto, who's a Venetian and draws the city extensively, begins to sketch the Rialto many times over. Is there a way of removing this? Yes. In sketch form, to study this realm of the city and study it very carefully. Study the gondola, study the tonality once again and temperament of the lagoon, which is very distinct. And there are moments, by the way, in high summer where the aquamarina, sort of pale blue, emerald tones of Biscayne Bay seem something like those of the lagoon. And it's not a far-fetched comparison, since they're both sandy bottoms, and they're both shallow. Biscayne Bay, that is, and the lagoon in Venice. It's no coincidence that the founders of the city would look to Venice for reference, not merely because Venice is an extraordinary and beautiful place, but because the water table in Venice, like in Biscayne Bay, is high, and it's lowland, it's marshland, and therefore we get Venetian causeway, Venetian pool, Venetian apartments. It's a kind of leitmotif or constant reference, often reference to the city of Venice. Can you guys hear me with this World War II here? I hope you can. I'm sorry about this, but it's the gardeners next door. I shouldn't say any of this because it's a recorded lecture, but nonetheless. So he paints this. He paints the Rialto as it is. You see, this is a painting of the Rialto with the bridge. In fact, this is the competition that we referred to a moment ago, where Palladio entered and didn't quite make it. An architect, ironically named Pompy, gain the commission and build this very beautiful single arch bridge, by the way, on the Rialto. And it went so the building replaced a wood structure that had been there for centuries. And there are a number of important buildings in the Rialto, like the Mint towards the right-hand side, and there's a market building there towards the right, and a number of warehouses which were important in Venice towards the left. And then it takes the same point of view, this same place, this same geography, this same topography, and replaces the buildings with what by then would be considered extraordinary buildings by Andrea Palladio. For instance, he replaces Pompey's bridge with the with Palladio's submission to the competition, which he lost. He replaces the Mint with the Basilica in Vicenza. These buildings, some of these buildings were not built like the bridge, and some of these buildings, like the Basilica, are built not in Venice, but rather in Vicenza, in the Veneto, which is an outreach of Venice. And towards the left here, we see a corner of the Palazzo Civena and a corner of the Palazzo Caricati, all relating to the canal, to the Grand Canal, in the same manner. It's the same place, but brought to a different picture frame, perspective even. Perspective in the reality of a city, the reality of life itself, by removing the old, relatively mundane buildings that exist and replacing them with this extraordinary architecture. The Palazzo Civena, for instance, which is a very early work of Andrea Palladio that introduces or reintroduces the gallery to the urban setting. It's a modest building, but the gallery would become a very big deal in the evolution of architecture in the West in general. The Palazzo Caricati, where the gallery, as you can see here, takes a completely different level of importance. This is a fantastic building. In Vicenza also, the corner of the Palazzo Caricati, and the Basilica itself in Vicenza, which is City Hall in the city of Vicenza, and brings them together into this reconsideration, reinvention of the mundane as it is built in the reality of the